Hey, what's up? Zach here, and this is the ultimate basketball shoe buyer's guide for the beginning of the 2024 NBA season. Here we go. And remember, this particular guide is meant to be as personalized as possible to your individual needs. That's why I have 3 major categories and then a bunch of subcategories. So if you're somebody with a wide foot and ball of foot pain and you're also a center, you should be able to look in each list and see which shoe shows up in each one of them, or just the shoe that shows up in the majority of those categories, and then match the shoe that kind of fits best with you. The shoe that shows up in all the categories or shoes, or a shoe that shows up in the majority of those categories, is usually going to be the one that I find best for your particular needs. And speaking of those particular needs, if you're looking to buy any of these shoes on this list, I will have links in the description below, as well as links to consulting in the description below if you are somebody with, kind of issues that are just really individualized, that need help either finding a shoe or answers to some really specific basketball issues going on with your foot or ankle. That is down in the description below as well. All right, let's get started with number 1. Foot type. Now, if you're somebody with a wider foot, that can actually be a pretty big asset when playing basketball, but it's also kind of an issue fitting shoes. The best shoes for this, to me, are the ones that just come in a 2E width, like the New Balance 2-Way Volume 4 2E. Now, if you're a woman trying to find a wider width shoe, you can get one in a wider width, or you can just get the standard men's size that's going to be a little wider. That also has implications for men on the narrow side of the spectrum. Because if you're a male player looking for a narrow shoe, you can always go with the women's version, and that usually will come in a little bit of a narrow last, unless it's a unisex size, like something like the Curry Flow 10 or 11. Those will come in a standard size. That's also going to be just a tad on the narrow spectrum because it's got to fit both foot widths. But if you are somebody with a narrow foot, there are quite a bit of options, starting with something like the Nike Sabrina 1. And if you're someone with just a standard or true width foot, really any shoe in its standard size typically can fit you. Some narrow shoes you have to go up a half size, some wide shoes you have to go down a half size, but typically somebody with a true width foot can fit just about any shoe on their foot, as long as you figure out the sizing, which is why I have a fit section in every single video I do. And if you're somebody with a high arch, and usually those people are ones that have really loud footsteps, you're gonna want something that has a lot of padding, or at least forgiveness, in the forefoot as well as in the heel, because those are the 2 places you're coming down the most on. Typically anything with Pebex is really good. Zoom Air is very good for this. Something like the Riggerer AR1, the Nike GT Jump 1 or 2, or the Way of Wade All City 11 V1 or V2. And if you're somebody with a flatter foot, which also can be an asset on the court, you are going to want something with a more supportive shank in the shoe, something that's going to be able to hold you up really well. Something like, once again, the New Balance 2-Way V4 is a fantastic option for that, because it's nimble enough to get you around the court, but it's also supportive enough, because sometimes people with flat feet need more maximalist shoes, either to, number 1, hold an orthotic in, or just to hold their foot up. And speaking of those orthotics, if you are someone that wears orthotics and braces, you need a shoe that, number 1, doesn't have the heel slippage issues in it, to where when you put a brace or an orthotic on, it jacks your foot out of the shoe and creates slippage. But number 2, something with a supportive enough midsole to hold that orthotic or brace kind of centered in the shoe. It's really a lot of the shoes in the maximalist category, and a lot of the shoes that are good for high arched feet are also going to be good for orthotics and braces. And that brings us to number 2, positions and game style. If you're a center and need protection from multiple different forces, both external as well as underneath of your foot, you're going to want something more maximalist, like the 361 AG4, the Daymate Extended Play, or an out-of-the-box pick for that is the Jordan 38. And if you're playing guard or wing, chances are you are bringing all the footwork to the table yourself, and you need a shoe that can just harness all that footwork. Something like the Curry Flow 11, the Anta Shockwave 5, the AR1, the Adidas Tray 3 are all shoes that allow really quick, shifty footwork, but also all have enough grip for you to be able to put on the brakes when you need to. But if you're a power forward, and to a little bit of a lesser extent a small forward, you want a shoe that's better at going north to south, as well as has a lot of resilience underfoot for a lot of times getting those offensive boards, just trying to get up into the air a little bit easier. Number 1, I think the best shoe right now for forwards is the Anta Shockwave 5, or really anything with a more supportive shank and some of the trappings of the shoes for centers. And when looking at the best shoes for jumping or for bounce, these are all shoes that have a very supportive shank, also shanks that can give a lot of reverb, a lot of diving board effect, but also a foam setup that allows for a forgiveness when you are jumping up and down, up and down, up and down, because remember, getting up into the air is only half the battle. It's coming back down and protecting those joints. That's the other half. And speaking of needing support on those crash landings, the best shoes for balance and containment are the shoes that have a little bit more of a forgiving shape on the midsole and outsole. Remember, containment isn't all about the uppers. Most of the containment in the shoe can be found in the structural makeup of the midsole as well as the shape of the midsole and outsole, and to a lesser extent the uppers. Still, one of the best shoes on the market for this is the Adidas Daymate. But if you're looking for nothing but speed, either going north to south on the court or side to side speed, you need a shoe with number one, a decent lateral flange, good grip, and just a shoe that's not super encumbering. One of the best shoes on the market right now for speed in any direction is the Riggerer AR1. And on sort of the opposite end of the speed spectrum, if all you care about is a shoe for durability, you're going to need three things. Number one, a very hard durometer outsole rubber, or just something with an additive in it that makes it really protective. Something like really anything in the way of Wade line. Then you also need a shoe that has rubber, or at least something that comes up over the medial or inside of the shoe to protect the toe box from dragging or sliding. But the most important thing, at least to me in terms of durability, is the midsole foam setup. You need something that is going to stay resilient over time, because if the midsole bottoms while you're playing, it doesn't matter what the rubber or the uppers are doing if you're losing all the support and all the liveliness out of the shoe, because that's when you can start to get injured. If you're someone that only plays on hardwood, maybe some rubberized, you need a shoe for really nimble grip. A lot of times shoes with very narrow, almost like razor sharp treads on the bottom are going to be the best for this. Still, one of the best shoes on the market for indoor hardwood is the Jordan 37 Low, or on the opposite end of that spectrum is the Curry Flow 11. And if you're someone that plays a lot on hardwood as well as outdoor asphalt, cement, or concrete, you need a shoe that can, have enough grip on those indoor courts, but enough, rugged durability for those outdoor courts. Really good shoe for this is the Way of Wade Fission 8. And if you want to see some of my favorite shoes just for outdoor courts, I do a video on that. I will leave it a link in the description below. But if you're one of the many basketball players that prefers to wear tennis shoes for outdoor basketball, still one of the best ones for this is the New Balance Coco CG1. And it's probably going to continue to be one of the best until proven otherwise. All right, let's move on to number 3, injuries, body type, and chronic conditions. If you're a basketball suffering from heel pain, number one, you're not alone. It's one of the most common things I treat in basketball and tennis players. But also, you're going to want a shoe with, number one, a lot of support in the shank, a lot of forgiving support in the heel, as well as a heel counter in the shoe that does not allow a lot of micro motion and or be able to accept an orthotic. A lot of the shoes that are good for flat and high arched feet are also really good for heel pain. And staying in the rear foot, if you're someone that's a chronic ankle sprainer, a lot of the shoes that are best for containment are also really good for an ankle sprainer. You're just going to want a shoe with, number one, very aggressive lateral flange, really nice supportive midsole shape and setup, just something that is nice and well balanced underfoot. And yes, uppers that are supportive are a nice touch, but the number one thing to look at is that midsole shape and outsole shape. And if you're somebody with a painful flat foot, arch strain, arch pain, tendinitis, things like that, a lot of the same shoes that are good for containment, high arched feet, ankle spraining, and heel pain are some of those same shoes. You want something with a very supportive shank. That's kind of the number one thing you want in this category. Something like, once again, the New Balance two-way V4. And if you're somebody with ball of foot pain, really, you can't go wrong with Zoom Air in the forefoot, a lot of these shoes, and you can't go wrong with something like a really forgiving Pebex. Something like, once again, the Nike GT Jump 2 is a really nice option for this, as long as you fit the other profiles for it. And if you're somebody suffering from shin splints, you need a few things. Number one, a shoe that does not allow a lot of micro motion. Number two, a shoe that does not allow a lot of strain on your foot or your arch. But number three, a shoe that's easy enough to move back and forth with, and the shoe that is resilient enough to give you just a little bit of energy return, so you're not having to overutilize that tibialis anterior, which is usually the main culprit of shin splints. So, I mean, Jordan 38 to me is a really good pickup for this. The Jordan 37 Low is still a great pickup for this. A lot of the shoes that are good for bounce can also be good for shin splints too. And the best basketball shoes for knee, hip, or back pain are also the best shoes for shock absorption. In this category, the 361 AG4 is my ultimate favorite. And if you're someone on the lighter weight end of the spectrum or heavier end of the spectrum, you're gonna need much different shoes. Someone who's really lightweight, you don't want something really bottom heavy, kind of bogging you down, making it feel like you're trying to lug bricks under your foot. Versus when you're a heavier player, you need a shoe that can harness all the energy and all the shock you're putting into the shoe. So you can't have a shoe that is super light that's just gonna buckle under your foot. Just much different categories for much different players. But like most of these categories, there is some crossover. And if you're looking for breathability in the shoe, number one, you want something with light upper materials. Really anything with a leno weave in it, really anything you can see through the shoe, or something that has enough pores in the tongue to expel that hot air is gonna be good for that. And like I talked about before, finding a shoe that can fit your particular foot can be pretty daunting, especially if you have an orthotic or brace in there, and especially if you're trying to figure out which orthotic or brace that you need for your foot, or if you need one at all. So if you want a little bit of help with that situation, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the sneakerverse.